Hi, everybody. Charles Hoskinson here. I promised a group a little while ago, Vivian and her friends, to answer a few questions for a WeChat group called 499 Block Korea. So they have 499 of the most prominent female entrepreneurs in Korea who are in the blockchain space. And they asked me for an interview. And originally it was supposed to be a text interview. And then I said, well, how about I just make a video and you guys give me the questions and I can answer those questions. And then they can translate it into Korean and to other languages as well. I believe they have a following in China. So the 8 questions that they asked me, the first question is, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I'm Charles Hoskinson, the CEO of IOHK. The second question is, can you introduce IOHK, Cardano Foundation, and Emergo? So I believe this question's in context to the Cardano project. So for those in the group, the Cardano project is a project that began in 2015, and it really was a federation of different actors attempting to functionally build a third-generation cryptocurrency. And it's being built with principles, so we're using formal methods and peer review. And the purpose of this project is to imagine a classification of technology, a collection of technology that would allow us to scale to millions to billions of users, be interoperable with both legacy and also traditional cryptocurrency systems, and then finally be sustainable, so it's a system that can last long term. 3 principal entities that came together to form this confederation were the Cardano Foundation, which is a Stiftung based in Zug, Emergo, which is a company based in Japan, and IOHK joined in as the technical partner, and we're based in Wyoming as Input Output Global. Question 2, congratulations for success of mainnet launch. Can we know the present situation of Daedalus upgrade development, and can we know Cardano's Ouroboros consensus algorithm? So mainnet for Cardano launched in September of 2014. And basically, it was the first purpose was to build a population around the principles of the project, to get some liquidity for the project, and to also allow us to test a lot of the concepts and ideas that we've been playing around with, like how to build a Haskell-based software product, how to release software into market, how to work with infrastructure providers like wallet providers, ledger, exchanges, these types of people. And now we're leaving the old area, Byron, which was the first generation of the system, and we're entering the Shelley phase. Now, the question mentioned Daedalus, Cardano wallet. Daedalus is going to go through a lot of upgrades this year. One of our highest priorities is multi-sig support. We'd also like to have account differentiation, so you can manage accounts that are living outside of Daedalus, for example, paper wallets as well as hardware wallet devices, staking support, and also stake pool centers, so you can actually search and register your own stake pools. And then later on, upgrades like a CSV exporter, having a lot more metadata, some sort of a friend system, so you can add friends for other people and alias addresses to them, things like light wallet support, and other features like that, command line interface inside the GUI, so you can bring up a terminal and write your own scripts against the wallet. These are the kinds of things that we anticipate within 2019 and throughout 2020. And eventually we'll have a treasury system within Cardano, and there'll be a voting center for that treasury system, kind of like Dash Central or something like that. Okay, question 3. Since when are you thinking of practical use in Japan? What are your plans for the practical use of Cardano, blockchain, and the ADA coin in the Asian market? So Emergo is really responsible for the commercialization of the technology, and they've been doing various things throughout Japan, Indonesia, but we have been aggressively pursuing Mongolia as a great case study for all kinds of things, from building local currencies to air quality pilots to supply chain projects. Really, the growth curve for Cardano, and the thing that we think a lot about is how do we build an on-ramp for people that are completely outside of the cryptocurrency space. Right now, a lot of people, especially in the top 15, top 20, are making a very win-lose argument about the adoption of cryptocurrency. So when product A wants to get users, what they do is they target product B, and they go to product B and say, oh, no, your thing is crap. You should leave the product and come to our thing. For example, a lot of people are saying, oh, abandon Ethereum, for example, Tron, and they say, leave Ethereum and come develop on our platform. So that's basically a sum zero game. And what we've looked at the adoption of Cardano is we've always viewed it in terms of bringing new people into the space. So, for example, we're right now negotiating with the Ethiopian government to produce a token for Addis Ababa. Well, that's not just something that lives in isolation. If that's successful, then what that means is we brought millions of new people into the cryptocurrency world because they now have wallets and digital identities and they're in the space. And you can use that ecosystem to now give them secondary services, which are inevitably going to be things like dApps on Cardano. So these are people who previously had no business in the cryptocurrency space. They didn't care about cryptocurrencies. And now they've been brought into our industry through some sort of channel. So that's really the adoption curve that we're chasing because it scales very, very well. There's certainly a lot of things we offer for people within the cryptocurrency space. We will make the argument we think Plutus is really the best development environment and the safest development experience for high assurance applications, and smart contracts by definition are. And of course, we'll aggressively compete in places to try to bring users in. But really, if all we're doing is moving water from one side of the bathtub to the other, you haven't really added a lot more water, and it's going to just get colder and colder. You have to add new water into the tub. And that's basically what we're doing with our strategy. Okay, question 3, part 1. And now there's a part 2. Oh, come on. That's not fair. What projects or products do you plan to use if it becomes practical in Japan? Japan really does need a lot of innovation, especially in the rural areas. They have a population dynamic that is kind of working against the entire country. So what's happening in Japan at the moment is that people are getting older and the workforce continues to get more and more centralized. So people leave areas like Hokkaido or Fukuoka or Hiroshima or Okinawa, and they tend to centralize in places like Tokyo, for example. And so as a consequence, these rural areas in Japan have become systematically poorer. They have a higher unemployment rate, and basically there's not a lot of replacement population. So as a consequence, the real estate prices are going down. Wealth is starting to leave those areas. And it's a big challenge for the Japanese government, and it's a big challenge for Japan as a country. So it would be really cool to see if we can reinvigorate these areas of rural Japan using innovative technologies, not just blockchain, but AI and IoT and other things to innovate industry verticals that are meaningful in those areas. For example, there's a lot of agricultural production in rural Japan, especially with rice and things like that. And this is ripe for innovation. And just small changes could potentially massively improve yields, improve quality, and bring a little bit more wealth in. Furthermore, if they develop a more entrepreneurial culture, there are incentives for people to not leave their families, but actually stay and innovate within those local areas. So blockchain can certainly be part of that story. And ironically, we actually just went to University of Wyoming today. I drove up to Laramie, Wyoming from Longmont, where I live. And it was a nice 2-hour drive, very foggy down 287. But I had a chance to speak with a lot of people there. And they've run into the same situation in Wyoming, where people tend to leave. They don't tend to stay. And so when your best and brightest are always leaving and your young people are always leaving, it really does hurt the local economy. And it makes you kind of a monolithic economy around agriculture and natural resource extraction. So the same types of solutions that potentially can keep people in Wyoming could potentially also help in rural Japan. And it'd be really fun to see if Cardano could be part of that story, given the nature that you don't have to move or relocate to build great companies. And it's not necessarily exclusive to Japan. Cardano released an ADA card in Korea. How do you plan to develop it in the future? So the ADA card was important to have great cash in, great cash out in merchant adoption if you do plan to use ADA as a currency, or if you do plan to use ADA as some form of a store of value. You need to have good liquidity, and you need to have the ability to easily go in and out of the currency, or else it's not terribly useful. So my belief is that this is organically going to happen over time. Samsung is starting to support cryptocurrency wallets. They started with Ethereum, but there's a lot of discussion about opening that up. In Korea in particular, I'll be there, I believe, in July. And I think we do have a meeting with Samsung, and I'm going to try to get an understanding of what it's going to take to get into that ecosystem. This is an S10, and there are many of them in circulation, and every Samsung phone built from here on out will likely have cryptocurrency wallet capabilities. And because people like competing, that's going to end up being on HTC phones, and it's going to be on iPhones and all kinds of things. And so if you have cryptocurrencies in the phone, you have NFC in the phone, and you have programmable POSs, you're really going to see an easy time to do transactions with cryptocurrencies to merchants. And then when the regulations get a little bit better, what will happen is market makers will exist in real time. So the merchant actually doesn't have to accept ADA or Bitcoin or Ether. They'll simply just get whatever currency, won or yen or dollars. And in the process of getting that, there's been some middleman that's actually taking the crypto side, the volatility for a fee, just like BitPay does. So I firmly believe that's going to happen. And all we really need to do is just make sure that we're included in that list of currencies that get into these devices. And as a top 10 coin, and given that we have some great technology, I think we have a very high chance of that. Okay, let me see here. Okay, that was the question. Because it was a Korean to English translation, I'll infer that probably wanted to know more about that memorandum of understanding. Yes, we signed a MOU shortly before the IHK Summit. Actually signed it before I went to the summit. And basically, the idea of the MOU is to explore constructing a municipal currency that people can use to pay their utilities in Addis Ababa. It's actually a big, big issue right now. If you want to pay your water bill, your power bill, it can take hours, some cases days. Even after you've paid it, sometimes they make mistakes and you still have your power turned off and you have to fight for days to get it turned on. I've even heard of cases of more affluent people living in Ethiopia paying people to just deal with the burden of paying their utilities every month. It's actually a small business that people can run on the side. So the idea is that you'd be able to take Bear, which is the local currency, digitize it, and then you could use this on a cell phone or a payment terminal to pay your utility bills instantly. So instead of it taking hours, you just click a button and you service the payment. Should that be successful, we could explore other things like cell phone bills, tolls, public transit fees, these types of things. So we're in the preliminary stages, but we have gone quite far in the negotiations, and we'll make later announcements about it. And it's a good model for municipal currencies throughout the world. And we've actually already examined other models. Like when I was in Mongolia, for example, we had great conversations with one of their telcos, Mobicom. And Mobicom actually has a similar system called Candy that they've constructed, where you can take the Tigric, which is the local currency of Mongolia, digitize it, and then use it to do similar things. So we definitely had some discussions about what they learned and what they've experienced, because they've been working on this for 12 years, off and on, in a variety of different models. It originally started as a loyalty point system, and then it turned into a kind of a regulated currency system regulated by the Bank of Mongolia. Question 6. What are your plans for 2019 for unbanked population? Also, is there a solution to Cardano's solution to a population that has never used financial services but is using cash only for economic bankruptcy or other reasons? Okay. Parsing the meaning of that question, basically it's a question about, well, how do we handle the unbanked? And I think there's really a three-pronged approach you need to examine with the unbanked. Number one, you need to understand that the unbanked are not poor necessarily. They still have the ability to produce wealth. They still have local wealth, whether it be knowledge or land or raw resources. So there's something of value there. The problem is their value is incompatible with the global economy, and we tend to undervalue the things that they can contribute. So the first step is to get an understanding of what is that local value there, and then give them some sort of means of creating the liquidity within that source, and then bring that liquidity into a global market. So that's kind of the first step. There's economists who write about this, like Hernando de Soto Polar, and there's various people who have tried various experiments in my finds, such to try things. So that's one thing, is it's kind of an understanding of the market dynamics of where a person lives. And then second, you really need to look at case studies where there are rural populations, but those rural populations still have access to financial services. One of the reasons why we're so interested in Mongolia as a country is not because it's an economic superpower. It's quite small. There's only 3 million people there, and nobody really considers Mongolia to be a huge economy in Asia. That said, despite the fact that 900,000 people in that country are nomads, they live in gers, and they burn coal to stay warm, 93% of the people in the country have access to banking services. So that means a considerable amount of the nomads in Mongolia are banked. And that should not be the case. Very rural areas outside of Ulaanbaatar, there's no cell phone signal, and there's dirt roads and these things. And People basically just wander throughout, follow their animals, yet they actually have access to banking services. So there's certain things that have been done very right within those particular types of models. And there are all other models. Like when we talk to the Agricultural Transformation Agency, the ATA in Ethiopia, we had a discussion about their voucher systems that they gave farmers to purchase fertilizer and other goods. And we found out that among the pilots that they did in 2012 to today, they had nearly 100% repayment rate, which is unheard of with microfinance. It's unheard of with voucher systems. So there are ways to move value, represent value to get banking services or mobile services to people who are quite remote. And also any diaspora that somehow still have access to financial systems are great case studies. So the second thing when you're dealing with the unbanked is figure out where it's actually worked before. And that provides you a lot of great models of how to bring people in. And the third thing is you don't directly bank people. You start with identity. That's kind of the most foundational component of a system, is just get an understanding of who people are. What are they? How old are they? Where do they live? What's their reputation? What is their social graph? A lot of this data does exist, even in the poorest places in the world. The problem is it's fragmented. Like when we talk to the ATA, they're responsible for representing 15 million smallholder farmers in Ethiopia. They have very extensive data sets on over 3 million of those 15 million farmers, and they put them into what are called agricultural commercialization clusters, ACCs. That said, the data sets live in like 6-7 silos, and they're on paper, and it's really difficult to unify and pull things together. So before you attempt to bank anybody, the first step is to attempt to identify people and get an understanding of who people are. And do that in a very low cost way, and do that in a way that's digital, and do that in a way where you can retrieve that information easily, mine it, and do all kinds of things. Now, once you have that, then likely if you've done it correctly, you also have a public-private key pair that is associated with the identity. And then you can use that as a root for a wallet, as for some sort of a payment system that's cryptocurrency based. Then there's a question of, well, what are the objects that operate on those payment rails? And if you have the ability to digitize the local currency of the country or some representation of that local currency, then it's actually incredibly easy to get local buy-in and incredibly easy to get people paid. And in many cases, it's a superior system to the systems that we see in the developing world. Like one of my biggest frustrations in Ethiopia is having to carry a lot of bearer. The currency is not worth very much. You get tons out of the ATM, and you end up carrying large chunks of money to pay for restaurants and transportation and other such things. And it's quite dangerous. It's quite inefficient. And also, the currency rapidly loses its value. If we had a digitized representation of it, that would solve a lot of problems for me, especially if I could easily convert that back into the paper representation if necessary. That third plank of basically just get your identity system and then get that system linked to a payment system and then digitize local representations of the currency, that gives you then a great foundation. And then it's very easy to construct micro banks. You do that with local merchants, local communities. You can set up cooperatives. There's all kinds of models. And then you can even back the portfolios with collateral, like agricultural collateral. And then you can get international agreements to basically collateralize these small groups. And they'll have a very low default risk, and the credit will be quite good. And then it's easy to link them together on broader markets. And these are the things that we kind of think about. There's a lot of financial engineering that we can do to make these things sustainable. That said, it does take years, some cases decades, but we're not in this alone. Mohammed Yunus started this a long time ago with Grameen Bank, and there's dozens of great entrepreneurs, some have won Nobel Prizes for it, who think about it. It's just a matter of taking old concepts and applying new tools and getting them unified under identity. Okay. All right, what else we got here? I wonder if there are any difficulties in the process of the agreement with the government. I wonder how the Cardano team can overcome the challenges they face in achieving their vision. It is very difficult working with governments. First, because governments don't play by normal rules. If I work with a commercial partner, let's say Microsoft or IBM, and they defraud us, we can take them to the court, sue them, and we live in rule of law jurisdictions like the European Union or United States. And basically, if they really violated the contract, I have a strong expectation that I'll be made whole. Now, this is not always true, and there's numerous cases where people have had to go to war with big companies, and the companies drag their feet for a long time. And these David and Goliath stories, they sometimes even make movies about. That said, when your counterparty is a government, the problem is the government can defraud you. This has happened in Venezuela. This has happened all throughout Africa. This happens all the time in Asia. And when they defraud you, you have no recourse. You can't go to the government's courts and say, "Oh, the government screwed me," especially if it's a jurisdiction that doesn't respect rule of law. So when you do business in these jurisdictions, it's not necessarily about the contract or the legal agreement that you have. That's nice to have, and certainly it's a necessary condition to doing business, but it's not sufficient. It's about politics and leverage. If you create a scenario where violation of the contract creates political risk, or it actually hurts the local economy, or it harms people's ability to operate, then there's a very strong possibility that that contract will continue to be honored, even if the politician doesn't want to do that. Great examples are, let's say you have a local branch and you're now employing lots of local people, and you've created an enormous amount of goodwill and good politics there that have benefited local politicians. Should they violate the contract and give it to their brother or their friend, you would terminate all those employees, and that nepotism and corruption would be unlikely to benefit the prior employees. As a consequence, they've just created a lot of unemployment and a lot of ill will in a very, very public way. So even if the regime is corrupt, it's not in their best interest to do that. Now, this is not always a surefire protection, but it shows you the train of thought you have to have in the developing world. It's more about relationships, it's more about leverage, it's more about politics than it is necessarily about rule of law and contracts. This is, again, another reason why these jurisdictions are having difficulty integrating themselves into the global economy. In the United States or other places, we think about rigid laws and contracts and agreements, and they're very meaningful, and that's really the soul of the deal. And then it's difficult to translate that to a place where it's a handshake and you know the guy, and and they like you, so you kind of get that. And it's very frustrating at times, because if governments change, it can be very devastating to your ability to operate. For Mongolia is a good example of this. So when we talked to the U.S. ambassador, one of the issues that was brought up was that the Mongolian government tends to have a global refresh very often, where they decimate their civil service. And that's really problematic. We used to do that in the United States. It was called the patronage system. So when somebody won the White House, they would just decimate the whole bureaucracy. Then later on, what ended up happening is you'd have your top layer, the command and control, be a political appointees and people associated with the political party. But the vast majority of people in the bureaucratic system would be lifers. They'd be permanent employees. So it didn't matter if Bill Clinton is president or George Bush is president or Donald Trump is president. It wouldn't have a lot of impact on the rank and file at the FBI or the Department of Energy or the Department of Agriculture. That means if you have a relationship with one of those ministries, then even if the leadership changes, that relationship is likely to stay stable and that the operations will be stable. But if they gut the entire set and they replace it every 24 or 36 months, it means that every 24 or 36 months, you may have to build new relationships in certain things that you think would be stable, even if people have an incentive to do it. Like let's say, for example, in Ulaanbaatar, to build a mass transit system, because they have some of the worst traffic in the world, become very difficult and problematic. So, and this is a hallmark of a lot of developing world countries, where regimes change and then they completely wipe out the civil service. Now, unfortunately, what this means is that some of the most stable countries tend to be the ones with some of the most vicious dictators, or the people who have been very good at holding on to power for long periods of time. So you create this perverse incentive to keep strong men in power in exchange for stable business relationships, whereas democracies that continue to rotate people out quickly could become unstable and damage their business relationships. So it is another big challenge, and it's something that you have to think really carefully about. The other thing is the relationship between the regional government and the central government. Certain countries are incredibly stable, and other countries, the regional government actually has more power than the central country. And this could be in both the developing and developed world. Switzerland, for example, is infamous. They're a confederacy, and the cantons have an enormous amount of authority, including over taxation. It would be like the state of Colorado telling the IRS how my taxes should be. You just never see that in the United States, but you can see that in Switzerland. In other places, the central government is extremely, extremely powerful, like in Rwanda, for example, and they kind of mandate terms on how things are going to run. So we're working through that, and it's every country's a snowflake, and and really what you need to do is be very good at listening and be very good at business intelligence and be very good at reading a lot of reports. Everyone from the Rand Corporation to CFR to every think tank has produced thousands and thousands of pages of great documentation. And if you're a kind of a data nerd and you actually like reading these things, you really can find a lot of gems and learn a lot of great things. And then you can kind of create a risk profile for each country. And then certain countries are places where you can do business on a stable in the long term. And other countries, you really need to be paid up front because you're not sure of the certainty in 2 to 3 years. Okay. Let's see here. What are some things that will be added and developed to blockchain characteristics of ADA network other than simple monetary function? Well, Cardano is a 3rd generation cryptocurrency, so that means we have to incorporate all the 1st and 2nd generation features. So 1st generation are payment system, just like Bitcoin. 2nd generation are smart contracts, like Ethereum. The 3rd generation are the value-added features, so namely the features required to achieve scale. So take these prior 2 generations and make them work for millions to billions. And then also be able to have the features of your system be understood by other systems outside of your system, and also understand things from systems outside of your system. So interoperability. And then finally, a treasury system and a voting system for the governance of the system. So this is non-trivial. Democracy is super hard. Economics is super hard. And interoperability is an endless goal. And then furthermore, scale is extremely hard because you're trying to keep your characteristics and your principles of your system as you add users. So if we achieve these things alone, that would be revolutionary. But when you really start deconstructing a lot of these requirements, you start learning that you have to add a lot of new features and functionality. For example, the very same things that will make you interoperable with other blockchains will also give you best-in-class like clients, because you need the ability to validate facts and transactions and other things from foreign systems. Those same proofs can be reused on your own blockchain. So you end up getting cell phone clients and like clients that have full node security, for example, and they work very quickly and they can validate transactions very quickly. The same kinds of things that will allow you to scale to millions of users will inevitably allow you to be a payment system that's usable at a point of sale or an ATM or a vending machine, which is something that's quite difficult with a Bitcoin-like system. And furthermore, the same kinds of things that allow you to have a treasury system will also allow you to explore all kinds of new monetary policy. It will also allow you to explore all kinds of new funding structures and organizational structures for the ecosystem, not just on the core protocol, but also for a venture capital component, so for future companies. So it's entirely possible that the protocol can be its own VC. So these are the kinds of features we're exploring. We also look at other things like we built DSLs. We built a financial DSL for Marlowe, and we're combining with Actis. So you kind of have a bank in a box, and you can do everything they can do in a single modeling language. And that's getting more sophisticated day by day. We're looking into legal DSLs as well, so you can write up really cool computer understandable contracts. We also think about things like contingent settlement and decentralized identifiers and these types of things, which are great innovations that need to be brought into the cryptocurrency space. And they are being brought in through the periphery, but they need to be brought into mainstream top 10 cryptocurrencies, in addition to the ability to run things in ephemeral off-chain domains, like, for example, MPC circuits off-chain and for interactive temporary computation, or concise off-chain computation, through the use of snarks and things like that. So these are the kinds of things we'll bring to heel, and we have the researchers for it. We have the roadmap for it. We kind of know who we need to talk to, and some things can't be done in this year or next year because they simply require more basic science. For Boris, for example, we started the research for that in 2015. And we're still doing research, and we've written a lot of papers, and we'll continue to write a lot of papers, but we're now kind of midstream to late stream in that research line. Other things like treasury systems, the 1st generation will come out in 2020, but by no means is that the last generation. It's going to go on for 5 years, 10 years before I think we have a system that will be universally accepted by the space as, yeah, this is definitely the way to go. Just like proof of stake is starting to become more and more accepted within the top 10. Okay, question 8. I want to know Charles's personal wishes and opinions about what he thinks ADA will have in the next 5 years. Okay, so, my goal for ADA was to look at it in a series of basically epochs, of generations, of evolutions. So, it's almost like a hero's journey. So when we started, we were nothing. We were just an idea on a whiteboard of, well, we have some high level goals. How do we get to millions of users? How do we work with a lot of stuff? How do we be sustainable? And what does our growth model need to look like? And, and how do we do science? And how do we do engineering? And these were aspirations. They were nothing. They were just basically people talking in a boardroom, writing ideas with a marker on a whiteboard, no funding, no nothing. And basically no one took us seriously. I was just the guy that left Ethereum. That was it. Then funding materialized, scientists materialized, engineers materialized, and then we got the right to try. So now we are right in the middle of trying. And you can see very publicly, in a very transparent way, an enormous amount of output from that. More than 40 papers. You can see lots of code, products in market, great liquidity, a lot of community members, ideas flowing very rapidly, progress starting to speed up. And what's going to happen is over time, the system will become more and more useful. Now, my first hope for the ADA project in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years is for the product to become ubiquitous, just like Bitcoin has become ubiquitous. Something that's there, people accept that it's there. There's no belief that it's ever going to go away. It's there. It's infrastructure. And I'd also like for the project to become self-evolving and self-sustaining. So even if I go away, IOHK goes away, even if there's major losses, if one country bans something or whatever, no lawsuit, no death, no event can undo it. And furthermore, there's a certain degree of inevitability about the evolution of the system. So even if we have certain things not completely figured out or certain things were a little rough, people just expect that it's going to get there and it's going to get done. It's almost like self-driving cars. I don't really talk to a lot of people anymore who don't believe that self-driving cars are inevitable. And we see all these Teslas driving down the street, and every single one of them is just a big sponge of sensor data. And over time, it's creating a reality where these cars will eventually drive better than human beings. And the set of skeptics has gone from huge to smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Just like the evolution of the internet, there was a certain degree of inevitability to that, where it started where everybody was very skeptical. People, never replace the newspaper, never replace the yellow pages, never replace banks or these things. And now you ask anybody in 2019, and it's, of course, it's self-evident. And they say, what are all these problems like? Will we get 5G out? Oh, of course 5G will come out. And will it be fast? Oh, of course it'll be fast. If you asked any sampling of people in the United States, do you believe your internet speed and the quality of your internet experience will be better in 2025 or 2030 than it is today? Probably 100% of them will say, yes, of course it'll be better. Of course we'll have more. There's an inevitability to the evolution and the quality of the system. And not everything is like that. If you ask people about healthcare or education in the United States, and you say, do you think your healthcare will be less expensive and better in 2030 than it is today? Most Americans would actually probably be pretty cynical. If you asked us about Social Security, our retirement program we have, and you say, do you think Social Security will pay more and be more solvent, more viable, and more sustainable in 2030 than it is today? Most people would be cynical about that. So inevitability is a rare thing, and it's a very powerful thing. And just the mere presence of it creates faith in the system to keep the system going, even when you have regressions or hard times or events or other such things. For example, if some catastrophe happened, an asteroid struck the Earth and it knocked out 2/3 of the internet in the world, there is no reality where that would just stay dark forever. No one would ever put any money on that. To say, we'll repair it, we'll put it back together, we'll fix it, as we've seen when tsunamis have happened and cables have been clipped and other tragic events have happened. So my second hope is for ADA to be inevitable, in that we all know the technology is self-evolving. So we know that there'll be more papers published the next year. We know that more code is going to be written. There will be engineers, there will be scientists, there will be these people to do that. And if we can achieve that, then it's no longer a question of will we win. It's just a question of how long does it take for the system to truly achieve its goals. The third thing I'd like to see is for us to be a competitive impulse. The tagline of IOHK has always been cascading disruption. And what that means is really the first domino, the butterfly effect, this idea that some small perturbation to a system can have an enormous impact on the system in the long term. It's almost like putting a little droplet on something, and then somehow, some way, that just changes everything. And then you wake up 5 years later, 6 years later, 10 years later, and it has a huge, huge impact. And so if you think about the inevitability of our system, we've already changed the conversation as an ecosystem. When we started, no one was doing peer review in the top 10, top 20. No one. No one was even talking about formal methods. No one was talking about functional programming languages. And now you see dozens of projects adhering to these principles or claiming they do, from Harmony to Tezos to others. Everybody's starting to chase it. Even Ethereum is putting serious cash into setting up research centers, giving out research grants. Ethereum fellows are writing papers. These papers are going through peer review. Visa is writing papers. Everybody's writing papers. So the mere fact that we were commercially successful and we showed that the market values these things, and that to compete with us, you must become like us, has created a cascading effect that's starting to ripple throughout the entire cryptocurrency space. And while it does diminish our USP a little bit, it does also mean we now benefit from all the knowledge that's being accumulated by all these other people, and we don't have to pay for that. There are literally now thousands of scientists who are indirectly working for whoever is best at adapting the science. So if Dan Bonnet publishes a paper on verifiable delay functions, I can take that, and if it's good, put it into something. And that's the magic of that cascading effect. And then furthermore, we're all now starting to really focus in on the things that really matter as an ecosystem to think about. So it's providing us a great amount of feedback, and the quality of altcoins, the quality of new projects, the threshold for them has really changed since when I entered the space. In 2011, to be an altcoin was to fork Bitcoin and really just maybe change the proof of work algorithm and add some more coins. So you say, I'm going to go from SHA-256 to script, and I'm going to times the amount of coins by 4. Okay, that's your innovation. That was what we meant when we said altcoin. Now you have projects doing sharding and completely new BFT protocols and using Raptor Q and fountain codes and all this crazy stuff. That's really cool and really interesting and things you wouldn't even think about. And they're every one of them has some little thing that they've done that you'd never think. Like I looked at Ergo the other day, the Ergo platform. And I read the white paper, and it contained a proof of no pre-mine. And when you're bootstrapping a proof of work system, it's really nice to verify that nobody privately mined for a while before launch to get an advantage. But there was a proof of no pre-mine in the system. It's a small little chunk. It's a beautiful little thing. We recently developed a beautiful new proof of burn algorithm that people won't even know that addresses are burned until after the fact. So there's just some magical stuff that you see from all of these different projects, and they're cross-pollinating with each other. It really is the era of 1,000 flowers that are blooming, and they're becoming very, very, very beautiful. And if you're clever, and if you really take the time to look at that field of flowers, you can see unlimited detail and a lot of magic. The other thing is that cascading effect has created a political environment where it's safe now for people to embrace the field. It was not possible 5 years ago for Microsoft to show up the consensus and say, we're building an identity system on Bitcoin. That was just simply impossible, politically speaking. But now, not only have they done it, Facebook is launching a coin, Google is doing stuff, everybody's involved, Amazon's involved. And these guys have thousands of scientists, thousands of engineers, billions of customers. And as a consequence, these things are going to enter the domain, and I'm a lot more nimble than they are. So whatever they come up with, I'm probably going to be able to use a lot faster. So while we were the first mover, it created kind of a ripple effect that started bringing bigger and bigger people in. It started justifying that peer review is a good idea, formal methods is a good idea, and it's increased the funding orders of magnitude more than what we could put in. And we're real proud of that. And I think that Cardano as a project has already achieved great success in that respect. I'm also really looking forward to getting proof of stake out and getting side chains out and these types of things out, because we see them in the lab, we read about them, you understand them, and it's almost like being a great architect. And you write up these beautiful blueprints, and you look at it and you say, "Wow, that's going to be magical." And you see, and you just know that people are going to love it. Or you're a great screenplay writer or a great author, and you write this wonderful book, but it only really comes alive when people use it. And you actually see them using it, and they have those experiences, and they say, "This is incredible. I've never seen anything like this. This is a lot of fun." And we just get really giddy, and we get really excited. And within 5 years, many of the things that I got super excited about on paper are going to be reality. They're going to be there. It was almost like in the early days of Ethereum when we were talking about this concept of a smart contract. It wasn't real until you saw MakerDAO and Golem and all these other projects, and they entered market, and it woke up thousands of people to have an imagination and do something. I was just at University of Wyoming, and I found out they taught a blockchain course, and they built a voting system as the class in Solidity. To go to a university and just talk to the computer science department and find out that you're teaching undergraduate courses using programming languages and tools and techniques that just didn't even exist a few years ago, and students are getting inspired, and one of them went on to start a company called like Hemp Chain, and they want to model the supply chain of hemp and these things. That's really magical, and that's really exciting. It's the privilege of a lifetime to see these types of things, and we have a lot of magic we came up with for Cardano, and it's going to be super exciting over the next 5 years to see that magic roll its way out. So anyway, thank you for the questions. Great group of female entrepreneurs all throughout Korea. I think I'm going to Korea in July, so I hope to see a lot of them there. And I'm happy to answer questions in the future. If you guys have them or want to do interviews like this, please do send them my way. So cheers, everybody. I'll talk to you soon.